I think we are.
Hold on one second. I just need to make sure I switch off the YouTube channel before it goes live. So we are live. So welcome to Missing Persons Uncovered. I'm Caroline Humer, Global Online Child Protection Expert, and I'm joined by.
I'm Karen Shalev. I'm professor in missing person studies at the University of Portsmouth in the UK.
And in this podcast series, we seek to understand the complexities of a global issue. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people go missing worldwide. In every episode, we talk to professionals to share insights into how we can all be more aware and take actions to protect vulnerable people in our communities and families from going missing. This week, we have Cara and Colin joining us from the East Coast as well as the UK. But before we introduce them, let me do the usual housekeeping notes. That there will be a new episode every 2 weeks on a different topic with different professionals from social workers, police, and researchers. If you're interested in missing persons and like the podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as on the podcast platforms. And please give us some stars so we understand that you actually like it. If you can also find us under Missing Persons Uncovered. Karen and I do not provide assistance in specific missing person cases, so please contact the local NGO or charity or your local police department. Feel free to comment or ask questions throughout the live discussion. Please avoid mentioning specific cases or names, and let's keep it also professional. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please say hello and where you are from. I'm still actually in Vienna, Austria, and Karen's in the UK.
Before we start, we like to ask our guests for some quotes just to get us kind of into the realm of what we're going to talk about. So, Cara, why don't we start with you? What quote did you choose?
What inspires me is our hometown legend, Roberto Clemente, who was a famous baseball player and also a humanitarian. And he is known for the quote, anytime you have an opportunity to make a difference in this world and you don't, then you're wasting time on earth. And so that reflects what he was passionate about and how he chose to give back to society. Sadly, he died on a humanitarian trip. And here locally, we have a lot of memorials to Roberto Clemente just outside of our office. So it's a person that I think about regularly.
Thank you. And Colin?
Mine's a little bit different in as fact as Cara chose my quote late on this afternoon. And it was a quote by Theresa May. So it sounds like I'm quoting Theresa May, quoting me here now, but it was something I've said for a long time. So it makes you sound like you're really looking at yourself rather than someone else on this occasion. But it was, I'd always said when it comes to trafficking, and that includes obviously missing persons who are trafficked and exploited, and we always want convictions for people, the perpetrators, the exploiters, who are, targeting these missing persons or making these people become missing. I always felt if we get the victim, the survivor care correct, then that naturally follow will be more convictions, and that's what we want to try and stop the cases of exploitation with these things. So a little bit different, and Cara's fault for me choosing that one this afternoon.
Well, you got us right into the topic. So obviously today we're going to talk about trafficking, child trafficking, human trafficking, but also about the use of technology really in combating that. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. Before we start, maybe give us a little bit of background as to how you came to do what you do at the moment, and with a little bit of touch of what it is that you do with the organization. So, Colin, let's continue with you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm the UK and Europe engagement lead for Marinus Analytics. My previous background is I was a police officer for 30 years in Manchester in the UK. I retired 2 years ago from that and started working straight away for Marinus. Um, my background in policing was I spent the last 17 years specialising in human trafficking, um, looking at predominantly sex trafficking, but then as time went on and as we understood more the different types of exploitation, that was where my background was, and predominantly advising police how to deal with it really, and how we should deal with the people, the human beings involved, not just the investigations. And a big part of mine was I was seconded for a while as a victim advocacy specialist to a national team, because that was where my passion lay in how we deal with actually, like I said, the human beings.
Thank you. And Cara?
Wonderful. I'm based here in Pittsburgh. I'm a computer engineer, and I'm the co-founder of Marinus Analytics, which has the traffic jam public safety platform that came out of our local university, Carnegie Mellon. And so I've been here for over 12 years to guide what started as an academic prototype to now an international policing tool to help investigate and provide evidential support for trafficked and also for missing persons cases. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Colin when we first started to pursue serving the British police forces in the UK. It was a real pleasure to meet Colin, who was very innovative in considering the technology that we were working with. So I've known Colin for many years, first as a user of our system, and now have the opportunity to work with him every day, which is a joy.
And so again, before we really get into the specifics, I guess, of what you do in the topic, we want to define the key terms, right? We want to all talk about the same thing. How do you define, and that's open to you, whoever wants to go first, how do you define child or human trafficking? What does that actually mean?
I'm happy to
Colin,
go first. Go, sorry, Cara.
no, go for it, Colin.
I was just going to say, I'm liking us using the phrase human trafficking first of all, and child trafficking.
Hmm.
A big belief in mine is, and especially in the UK, we've called it modern slavery. It's moved away from that trafficking, and I don't think that's always the right phrase, because I don't think people understand the actual harm that's going on in modern society with the types of exploitation. So I'm glad we're calling it trafficking, in many parts of the world still. But for me, it should have the word exploitation in there. And, people get confused with the phrase modern slavery, first of all. There's survivors, victims from many parts of the world where it's not called that. So when they come to Western countries such as the UK, and then people say to them, right, you're being exploited, you're a victim of modern slavery. They don't always understand it, and the public don't understand it. So just to say that first of all, really, when it comes to the phrase human trafficking. Going back to what you actually asked me, though, it's
I think it's important if you can actually say what the difference is between modern slavery, trafficking. It's actually
well,
important for us to identify that from your point of view.
I suppose from a legal point of view, especially with the UK legislation, modern slavery is the umbrella term. So you've got the two parts of that. You've got the Section 1 under the Modern Slavery Acts, we're not, which is the slavery, servitude, forced or compulsory labour. But then you've got words like servitude and serf. Do people these days really understand? Is it a phrase that we use a lot? And then you've got the second part of it, which is a human trafficking, the movement of that person for the purposes of exploitation. And I think that's a big part of it, using that phrase exploitation. So modern slavery is an umbrella term for the two parts of it, really. And I think people understand the movement, but then they also don't understand that the movement doesn't need to be very far. People think it's still across borders, different countries, whereas it could be it could be half a mile or kilometre down the road. And when we're talking about missings here, they could be missing such a short distance away from their home, but being exploited and cannot get out of that situation.
Thank you. And Cara, from kind of the American maybe perspective?
Well, there is two perspectives. One on the international side, early in 2000, there was an age definition at 18. 18 is the international age of consent for participation in commercial sex work or commercial adult services. So that was, agreed upon under the Palermo Protocol. And then shortly after, the United States passed the Trafficking Victim Protection Act of 2000. And so our language is also a little bit vague for practical understanding. In the United States, trafficking is defined as force, fraud, or coercion. But maybe we could talk a little bit more practical. But really, in the United States and globally, anyone under the age of consent that's in commercial sex work, it's where we tend to focus in countering sex trafficking. Though we have more recently worked in more broader areas of trafficking research, counter trafficking research, but I think it's still very broad, but the idea is that you have a spectrum of people who are independent and working at will in this kind of unregulated space of specifically adult services. So any time though that there is, financial fraud, financial control, a force, and people who are, kind of being kind of unknowingly coerced into certain employment circumstances, that's where you tie it back to kind of the legal description.
And so that's the sexual exploitation side, right? The trafficking is the movement side of it. Is that correct? Yeah.
Well, in the
Okay.
UK, it's more defined. I would say that, Colin, than it is in the United States. And in the United
Yeah.
Kingdom, the difference between controlled prostitution and, say, human trafficking does have an element of travel in its legal definition. That's not really the case in the United States. Human smuggling is more the term that's used for the movement of people. And it's that is usually considered a separate category than the trafficking definition.
Yeah, and I'd just
And
say
from your
that to add.
experience,
Oh, sorry, Karen.
no, go on.
I was just to say to add to, you got the two parts that under the modern slavery side of it, the exploitation, but you've got that exploitation in both parts. The section one, the slavery servitude, somebody's being forced into something not on their terms and they can't escape it. Well, there's got to have been some movement as well, really, for them to get there in the first place as well. But then you've got the second part, which is that movement of a person for the purposes of exploitation. And what the good thing I think with the UK legislation is that person could be being taken somewhere away from their country, away from their town, their city, and the exploitation doesn't need to have happened. So there is that part of the legislation there where there's enough criminality being identified without the exploitation happening in the first place.
And
And in
where,
the
from
United
your experience, was the is missing coming into this?
Yeah, I've seen it in different ways. One, someone is, in fact, many ways. You've got the missing person, say from abroad, who is being duped by a controller, an exploiter, for a better life, maybe saying, come to the UK, don't tell your parents. And I come across many cases like this in the past where I dealt with a case many years ago where the lady she was 17 and the boyfriend conned her into coming to the UK let's have a trip. We won't tell your parents. You'll be there for a few days. You'll be back before they even know. 12 months later, her parents had no idea where she was and she's being beaten and raped in the UK on a daily basis. So you've got that side of it. You've got the missings who come in willingly, but not as missing. Obviously, at that point, they're coming to travel willingly, but then something happens to them, and then they can't contact their parents, their family, their loved ones. But then you've also got it where someone is a traffic victim and a victim of abuse, and I've had it where they've then been rescued, repatriated, helped, gone back to their home country, and then gone missing again and been forced into further exploitation as well somewhere else in the world. So it's a continuous like trail of exploitation going on that seems to have happened, over and over again. And continuously missing, continuously not being able to put down their roots in an area where it could be identified or they could feel safe to go and speak to somebody.
And so with Marinus Analytics, is that why you started it, to sort of focus on that pathway of trafficking with Traffic Jam, right? That was your first sort of element to the work that you were doing, to be able to identify sort of the roadmap, I guess, or the travel elements.
Well, certainly right at the beginning that I joined, it was clear that there was an intersection between missing and trafficking. And so, one of the memorable experiences that I had was we call it user discovery, leading user discovery. But when you actually talk to, in our case, the front line of public safety and understand their pain points. And so we had an academic prototype, and I wanted to hear the pain points so that we could try to, figure out how to link what we were working on to serve the investigative need. But in that case, I talked to a federal agent who was describing that they had a missing youth in the United States, that they had, for example, the phone number of the cell phone that was last known to be with this teenager, but they lost contact. They could not find her, and they believed that she was being sexually exploited. They were using our academic prototype to look through, advertisement data to see if they could pinpoint her whereabouts. And that's what the academic prototype could do. So it was very clear to me that this was an important use case. And we didn't want this technology just to be sitting within, an academic research project, that we needed to get it out so that for this kind of digital era that we're living in, that safety professionals have the way to access important data that can inform, their decisions and their actions that they take in helping missing and vulnerable youth, in our community. So right at the very beginning, there was just like this well-known understanding that we have complex cases that involve both missing, underage, and sexual exploitation. And so, that really was what inspired us. So that use case has always been, or not use case, but that investigative need has always been in our mind. And then over the years, the technology, we've been able to manipulate it in different ways or apply it in different ways to help with those needs.
And at what point did you start sort of, I mean, you said you connected the dots between missing and trafficking from pretty much from the beginning. But I know that there's always, when we talk about sort of the issue, it's always that child trafficking gets a little more attention than missing does. And with the services that you did you immediately sort of look at the link, or start by proving how to connect the dots with trafficking to provide law enforcement sort of the services and the intelligence, and then really showing that there is a link with missing?
Well, I have to admit that it's only really recently that we now have like this data analytics at scale where we can start to actually see how many missing people have been exposed or affected by, trafficking, exploitation, sexual exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation. And it's really just recently. So when we first started, we really had no ability to work with images in a meaningful way. It's really through the evolution of AI that in more recent years now, and even very recently, can do it at scale. Now, because of that, we can now start to see kind of the big picture trends of like missing person statistics and how our system is supporting those cases. So it's been very exciting recently, and I'm happy to be here today to share some of those insights. But early on, it was much more like individual query results. So, we were providing search and indexing of data so that you take all this unstructured content from online, and when a detective has a very basic question to interrogate that data, that they could make that request for an individual, person or case. And that's how we started more than a decade ago. But today now it's been more interesting because we're able, because of advanced computing, to do things over millions and even billion of records. And that wasn't something that we could do in like the early 2010s. It's only been in just, these recent last few years that the infrastructure is allowing us to do this greater insight and analysis.
So I want the listeners to and viewers to try to imagine what it is that you do to make it a little bit more concrete. Um, so bearing in mind that there's certain things I'm sure you don't want to expose for, kind of security issues really, and for the system. Um, so what can you tell us in terms of, let's say, Colin is a still working officer and gets details of a case or a name or a phone number or is suspicious of something going on, and then what?
Well, Colin, I'm gonna throw something out there. Maybe you can chime in with your personal experience, but if you think about where we were about a decade ago,
Yeah.
if a detective was trying to work and help, a case, I mean, we saw it firsthand where a photograph would be taped to the monitor, and somebody would sit at the browser and literally scroll and keep that photo there and try to look to see if through media and online content if they could spot the person they were looking for. And we're talking hours, if not days of effort to burn the retinas to try to look through content. So that's where we were about a decade ago with the internet, just a tremendous amount of information, but not having kind of an effective way to be able to find information that was relevant for public safety. So I don't know, Colin, if you remember what it was like to be contending with the internet early on, but
Yeah.
that's where we came from.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, the different parts of the world are still slightly different as well, and not as advanced as the US when it comes to looking for the missings through our data. With what we've got set up over there with the mass data of missings going through our system. And yeah, definitely, it just takes so long, and obviously hours mean a lot when it comes to that missing's life. And I do sometimes mean their life, not just they may never get recovered. It might get, killed at the end of the day, or hours, weeks, months of trawling through things trying to find that person, the amount of abuse that's happening in that time. So it's really important. So yeah, the technology that we've got, and I can give you a quick prime example of where it's worked at a smaller scale than what's set up in the US at the moment with the mass data. In the UK, just before I retired, there was a kidnap victim who was missing. No idea where she was at all. Um, Bulletin sent round all police forces trying to identify where this person may be. One of my colleagues in my office went, I'm going to run it through the facial recognition side of traffic jam. There's just something distinctive about a tattoo on this lady's neck. And put it through the system. We found a live advert where she was being advertised for sex. Um, Now, that would have possibly taken days, weeks, and other types of investigation to find her, at which point she's being raped, on a daily basis, if not hourly basis. So the technology can really, really enhance that. And that was from the facial recognition of picking up not so much the facial, but the tattoo on this lady's neck.
So in terms of the data that, again, I'm gonna ask and you can answer whatever you find appropriate, right? That you want to share. So the searches, the databases that the system searches, is that within the public domain? Do you have authorization from police forces? Like, is some things shared with other agencies? How does that work in terms of
And the
searching it?
services that we provide, our technology looks at public internet data. So the data that's publicly been, been put on the open web. We call that data a lot of times unstructured. So, that has really been the kind of contribution, is to be able to take this like kind of stream of unstructured information and make it searchable. And over the years, we want to provide a level of transparency that this is what we're doing for the public safety, protection of our society, protection of the next generation coming online, protection of vulnerable communities. There is just a tremendous amount of, in the world of counter-slavery, counter-trafficking, just financial gain and profit-driven motivation behind this exploitation, is just what we need to do to be on to have defensive capabilities, to contend with how technology has enabled modern day challenges. And so that's what our company does. Now, to search unstructured data in more recent years, we are using more advanced AI. And so one of the areas is facial recognition. So in 2017, we were one of the first groups to be able to leverage it for this use case, the first group. So we have very early on understanding of the technical performance of it, but also the practical and ethical considerations for how does public safety benefit and leverage AI. And when we work with public safety agencies, it's all on a formal basis. We're a vendor in service to their work. So there's a lot of contractual due diligence that has to happen before they can leverage the tool. And today, as part of this kind of class of technology, the forces do go through extensive like data impact protection assessments. So it's all about like, what is the use case, what data has access to it, what's the functionality, what is the safeguards around the technology's functionality. And so there usually is that level of due diligence to be able to get like a contractual relationship. So I love the fact, and that's the way we've operated always, is just being formal service to public safety. And so that we've all been through the chain of command approval before the front line, can run with the tool.
Just to add to
And
that, if
if
that's okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Colin. Just to add to that, the good thing is, it's like, as Cara said there, it's all open source. It's all out there in the public. The data we're using, and the good thing is it'll stick that way when it comes to exploiters of the missing, because we know it's, apart from child sexual abuse on its own, it's all to do with money, and all to need the punter, need the other people paying money to the exploiter. So that missing person is being advertised always on open. It's very rarely it's going to go down to the dark web. It's very rarely it's going to go to, because they're not going to get the customers. So that really helps then in regard to the stuff about the ethical side of what we do, first of all. And then the second part, just to add to, we said about time-wise of investigators, detectives. You've got a missing who's missing, say, in the UK, and they'd be looking at all maybe databases, looking, doing searches, trying to find, could this person be somewhere in the UK? But with the technology that there is now, they can search anywhere in the world. Now, that wouldn't have happened, and there's cases where, like I mentioned before, someone in the UK going missing is found in another country in Europe. And that's down to the technical ability of the AI, locating that person quickly.
It definitely gets rid of the border issue of, okay, I'm only searching in that radius of the border. Is it that, so we talked a little bit about the data that you search the missing person's information against to sort of find leads and intelligence. I'm just realizing, is it that law enforcement, like you, Colin, that you get a report of a missing person or a missing child that may or may not be trafficked, you don't know, but you're just automatically entering it into the system, and it starts running in the background while you do the other parts of the investigation?
Yeah, yeah, and I'd let Cara come in a second with that and how it's working more in the US. But I suppose in the UK and other parts of Europe and the world at the moment, yes, it takes seconds. I'd feel I wouldn't be doing my job if I was back in my old role if I weren't trying every single way of finding that missing. And if that means using AI, and that means looking for locations through websites, looking for facial recognition for the sake of a couple of seconds, and it may be that 99 times out of 100, you're not getting a hit. But for the sake of that one didn't do it, and it should be done really on, for me, on every single missing person inquiry, even if you don't suspect they're being, say, forced into sex somewhere, because it might just develop that intelligence that you've got in that person. So yeah, every time. But I'll let Cara jump in there with
Yeah.
and the mass
Well,
scale.
yeah, because basically in this journey, our technology was leveraged by trafficking investigators. So it was only through their intentional search that somebody would be checked for their whereabouts. And so what we have done recently is to start screening missing people at scale. And so that's where we're seeing these cases where nobody thought that these individuals were being commercially sexually exploited. And because now we have these online whereabouts, which are on, adult services advertising, that then it opens up a combination of investigations. So that's been eye-opening for us to see how, some of these records are being detected. You can see that there was an online history, but no one, at least it appears that they weren't being investigated in this space of, commercial sexual exploitation. So that then, once we have done this screening and we have these, records, then it escalates and triggers a police response to work this now from, the counter trafficking investigative angle, as well as the missing person recovery angle.
So again, just going back to practicals. So if somebody, let's say in Nigeria, has a case, don't know where a child possibly has been trafficked to, can they then contact you, or is that like, where are your services? Is that for people who are trafficked from the US elsewhere to the US, or just generally, if somebody internationally doesn't know where that person is, can they still contact you?
Technically, that's what we do. I mean, we in this very specific data space, which is commercial. We're looking at public commercial advertising. If we can search it, the technology can search it globally, and that is the very powerful thing, because people from vulnerable, communities do end up in the marketplace abroad. What if anybody's listening and is, concerned about a circumstance, it would be best if they contact us through police, because that is what we are equipped to do, is to be in service to the police front line. But certainly that is like the benefit of the infrastructure that we have.
I think it's important that just to say here that we will add the contact information on the website of the podcast for anyone who's interested in contacting you directly. So that's available. Is there a website on email that you want to say now that people can just write
Yeah,
down?
absolutely. I mean, at any point they can contact us through info@marinusanalytics.com. And then on the website itself, there will be there's a United States phone number. But certainly through email, they can reach out.
Right.
That's
Um,
great. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a bit about the use of AI and facial recognition because we touched on it, but I think it's important to maybe explore that a bit more. Um, you touched on the ethical awareness and so on, but when we talk about AI, certainly there's a lot of negative press, I guess, around that. You're using it in a positive way. What can you identify some of the ethical questions maybe that you faced early on that and kind of the decision making around that, just if other people are thinking
Sure.
about those things?
Sure. I mean, where there's a lot has historically been a lot of concern is in bias of marginalized communities. So if you take, kind of human flawed decision making and then you supercharge it with a computer, can you actually harm, communities at a greater extent than what was done when, certain actions were taken by humans? And so, I understood that's where we get into like early use cases, risk scoring of people. Does a person make parole or do they not make parole? Like that's where, there is bias in, decision making. You're going to amplify that with a computer. But in our space, we're really using AI for search. So in the digital world, we have tremendous amount of media, tremendous amount of imagery coming from everyone's smartphone. And so when you have like real critical needs, you need to find somebody. This is where we're using, basically trying to reduce the time that it takes to look for important records, to check is there other information that could be leveraged for, the professional to make a decision to move forward. And there's always a human in the loop in our space. We're using the computer to speed up a search, and then the results come back, and a human's going to have to interpret those results. And in our space, I think there's just a few things there. What does the computer do with AI? Like, what kind of decision is it trying to make? We don't want a black box. But when we're dealing with like visual search, when the results come back, it's kind of intuitive as to why the computer chose those results. And I feel that, when we think about bias, the real concern is, are we underperforming for certain skin tones? Are we underperforming for, certain features so that only people with certain appearances, can have the benefit of public safety response versus others? But one thing I will say, we knew always that the technology is always going to get better. So when we started in 2017, it's like version one, and the technology is always going to get better. And we actually use Amazon Web Services for facial recognition. We wouldn't be able to do facial recognition as a small company. I mean, we don't have that kind of bench of machine learning professionals and computer vision professionals. It's really a breakthrough that kind of technology became accessible in the cloud and affordable for our social impact, work. But I would say that, instead of being concerned about harm and bias that would result in harm. It was more about, the real concern is that it's not performing adequately enough to serve all communities. But the one thing that has happened that, that's 2017, we're in 2025, that technology just keeps getting more broad in its adaptability and accurate and its results. So it's, I when I look through all the results and the demographics of the people who are missing, I do feel there's still more work to be done, especially at a global level, to have these tools scale to, different appearances. But we're on a really positive track. And so I personally, like, this is a long-winded answer to say that, some of the real big concerns about AI and bias and black box decision making, I didn't feel that in when we were applying this to just speed up search results of media and looking for visual clues at scale that would help, a human who's making that query to the system.
But that's really important as well, that what Cara was saying about the human thing. I'm a big believer in that, in that our technology is not open to everybody. They need to be trained, they need to understand, how it's being used, use it in an ethical manner. That's a big part of the role I have in speaking to users and how to use it. For instance, I would never want someone to use it for targeting a sex worker who's a genuine sex worker who's working for their own, of their own volition. I won't want it to be used to target immigration if it's just to look at that side of it. So I think it's a big part of that. The ethical side of it is the user and them being trained and them understanding where it can help them. And at the end of the day, if this technology and the facial recognition is rescuing a 14-year-old child, then it's done its purpose. I can't see any reason why anyone could be critical, and not on an occasion when it does that, to identifying a child who's been exploited and has been abused, or missing, and potentially, even if they're not being abused at that moment in time, the potential for a missing child is just massive.
And I guess that's the argument that you give when there's police or law enforcement that you're trying to convince to use your system. Because I assume not only from an ethical standpoint of view, what you're talking about, Cara, of using it, but I think there's probably also hesitation from law enforcement to use it because they may not understand the exact technology or how beneficial it can be until you show them, but they still have bureaucracy and need to go through the red tape. So it's great that you save a 14-year-old child, but you still need to convince the higher ups, right?
Yeah, that definitely, I mean, there are times where, well, first of all, we can disable certain, features of our platform. So if there's ever any hesitation, by default, we can do, we can turn it off until they can like get through the decision-making process. And in some circumstances, if they don't truly use it, because they may work cases from a different angle, they may not be on missing persons recovery. They may not directly be, kind of on victim safeguarding. They may be working it from like a slightly different angle. If they don't particularly need that feature, we can also disable it by default. So there are all these like practical angles that we can, engage in discussion and just, make sure that what we're providing is totally in line with our internal policies and approval.
When you started this, so a little shifting a little bit, but when you started this and with what you've integrated now on missing persons, what was the biggest surprise that you found that you just didn't think that your system can do or that would give this kind of data?
Well, I think like, over the course of years now, I guess there's two big surprises that I can, kind of remember in navigating the work that we do. But one is when we first turned on the Amazon Web Services recognition, it worked really well. Like I think that was the most profound, 2017. I mean, I'll never forget those first few cases where I knew people were searching for these missing youth, and they had devoted weeks of energy, emotional energy, looking, and then here in 5 seconds, data, the sightings were found within the system, and it was almost bittersweet to know that the system could do it that quickly while all this manpower had been invested to try to help those missing individuals. Made a profound experience to me because we had been thinking about this use case for a long time, and we had tried some open source and some different academic solutions, but when we first went live, the results were profound. Then flash forward, after years of making this available, I think one of the other profound things that had happened is just having a youth right here in our hometown, realizing that we missed it. Like there were months ago, there had been some online sightings that Traffic Jam was sitting on, and no one had, been searching for that local youth. And so that was really bittersweet. Now, that individual was rescued, recovered, shortly after we had that recognition, but months had passed. So that became a moment. This happened about late 2021 that we started thinking like we have to figure out how to scale this system up. There's just too many missing people. There's too many youth at risk of trafficking. We have to try to figure out how to do this at a greater scale because in the United States, we're talking about the need to screen tens of thousands of people, many whom are missing, and then even beyond that more, youth in care, for example, that have risk of trafficking, they should be proactively screened. And so that's the journey that we're on now to make sure that we're not sitting on these records that would help these important cases, but to have the system more proactively screening versus needing a human to initiate the search.
So I've got two questions actually. One is if you can give us kind of the age range, I guess, of the people that you're searching for. And the other one is, do you also look for the offenders? We talked about it at the beginning, right? With your quote, Colin. If we find the victims and we understand that, can we identify the offenders and prosecute them? So does the system at all searches for, like, if you see an image of a victim with an offender, would it link it with another image of that offender somewhere else, or is that solely focusing on the victims?
Just on that part, I suppose it's solely focusing mainly on the victims. But by locating the victim as a detective, you're going to find that offender, because it's giving you that in to that investigation, that intelligence development, by you've located, for instance, a victim on, say, an adult service website. Someone is paying for that adult service website advert, and a lot of the time it won't be the person who's advertised, it's the exploiter. So it gives you that into the investigation. So even though it's not identifying maybe so much the offender that way, you get in there without going into um, major detail of the investigations.
Yeah.
Well, I can
And tell
give
me
I
about
can give
this.
you very concrete demographics if you're interested. But
Yeah, yeah, please do.
in the United States, we have screened several tens of thousands of missing persons for, media, like imagery, sightings using facial recognition. So when we think about what kind of results are we getting, one of the ways that we try to measure this, we have to, there's a lot of noise in the results. It's true. There's different levels of accuracy in those results. So to try to get like a magnitude of measurement, what we do is we set the bar at like 99 percentile facial recognition score, which is relative to this technology. It doesn't, it's just a basically a line that we draw to try to measure. So when we do that, out of all these results, I can say that, in about, 2 years' time of this technology being operated at scale, we've had about 1,000 positive matches from missing persons data. And out of that 1,000, over 900 were juvenile girls between the ages of 13 and 17. So it's very much is skewed. Now we're checking all ages, all genders, but I can count on one hand the number of males that are included, in that number. So it's definitely skewed towards girls that are in that age range. Now, we there's probably a lot of 18, 19, 20 up to 24. I don't have the breakdown of those ages, but because 18 is this, kind of agreed upon age of consent in the commercial sexual exploitation definition, that is kind of, we measured, but you're looking at over 90% basically of the matches are in that demographic of girls between 13 and 17.
That's incredible. That's an amazing number of 1,000 people that has helped hopefully identify.
Some of those would have been already known to be, concerns of trafficking and would have been investigated. But I know that, it's because of the scaling now that we have a whole new level of like public safety defense. And it means a lot to me personally. The problem still persists. We never are going to like fully, kind of solve the issue, but we are going to go from what would have been months of harm before, a response was mounted. This system is checking every day. Right now, this system is actively checking over 27,000 missing people every day to see if there's any online sightings. So, when there is a sighting, I believe that public safety, the community that we serve, will take action. There is a response in days now, which otherwise may have been, sadly, long periods of time of really just not knowing that there is, it's an underreported problem. And but that's where I feel that the real achievement has been made, is to just take that time down and to make the connection so that the right responders know what they're needed to focus on.
That's amazing, and I think that's great how much everything has changed in such a short period of time, less than 10 years. We've got about 10 minutes left, but I do want to talk a little bit more about, I guess, what's next with the future and how things are looking. You're using AI. What's sort of the next thing that you're thinking about that you think you need to integrate into the system, or seeing a trend that is new?
Well, let me answer, and then Colin, I want to pass it to you. Forgive me, Colin, for the international angle. So domestically in the United States, there's about 400,000 children in care in our human services, child welfare system. And there is a real opportunity here to provide systematic screening for the most vulnerable of those youth and before they go missing. Or if they are already missing, if they're privately, if that information hasn't been reported on one of our national or state bulletins. But certainly, there is a greater opportunity to use this technology for earlier detection. So that is a big effort for us. We have been very fortunate to receive funding, social impact funding from our Richard King Mellon Foundation here in Pittsburgh to help us expand and serve the state and local child welfare agencies. So that's one of the big initiatives that we are working on. And then Colin, from your angle, I mean, Colin is much more at a global view, working with a lot of the European countries. But could you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about like our international efforts?
Yeah, I suppose I know my job title was UK and Europe, but I also look at like South America as well. I'm to like places like Brazil and Colombia and that. Um, for me, the future would be how it's working so well and where Cara just spoke about those 900, cases with children there, is scaling it up so that every country in the world has got that capability. Because we know that what's happening in the US is not always the same as other countries. Like in the UK, I don't think as many children are being advertised online in that way as in the US. But is it happening in South America? Is it happening in Africa? Is it happening in Asia? Is it happening in Australia? Why not have that capability for children or vulnerable adults to be located when they're missing as a result of the technology that can be scaled up? So I don't know. Cara, as the CEO of the company, is probably going, calm down a little bit, Colin. We can't, we need to get it right. But I think we've got it right. And this is me coming from a law enforcement background as well. It just so helps so much, and is now better as a detective, and it'd be the same for NGOs. It'd be the same for any person to be able to locate somebody who's been missing as a result of it. We're also, I suppose, going forward as well is a lot of our background has been on sex trafficking, but we're also looking at other sectors now of exploitation as well, labor exploitation as well, and trying to transfer our skills that as a company into those sectors to try and help people who are being forced into exploitation in them as well, missing from different countries to come into the UK or to other parts of Europe or the US in the care sector, in labor exploitation, anything like that.
And we talked a bit about policing making kind of almost the referral to you. What I wanted to ask is if you touched on social services, so I just wanted to expand. If a social worker is concerned about a child being trafficked, for example, can they make a referral? Does it have to come from police?
No, they can reach out to us. Our goal is to serve social worker agencies. One of the I think if somebody has pain points in their current work, they're trying to action and find information on the cases that they're responsible. So if they're in social services and they're a caseworker and they have concerns, they can certainly reach out. We do provide like trial programs so they can kind of more quickly get access to the tool in an evaluation phase, and then they could use that as part of their real work and to see if that there's the good fit for that. But certainly yes, basically we are in service to public sector, and the safety landscape. We under human services, social services, it is the child protection services function. So it's kind of like 1 degree removed from like true police agencies. But yeah, certainly that is our ambition to serve those professionals in the public sector.
Thank you.
I think that's amazing, and I think that's a great way to sort of end our our podcast episode this week. Amazing what you're doing, amazing knowledge and experience that you bring to this. So thank you for sharing. We will absolutely add your website and the email address you've mentioned into our platforms so that people can reach out to you if they have questions or thoughts. So I really appreciate both of you joining us, especially Colin at last minute. So really appreciate you joining us from Manchester. Let me just finish this up and then we'll close up. If you'd like to find out more about our work and any resources that we've mentioned in today's episode or any of our episodes, please go and visit missingpersonsuncovered.com. If you have any questions you would like us to answer, please reach out to me or Karen. Happy to discuss any topics with you, either joining us or if you know somebody who would like to speak. Also, please contact us through the website if you have specific information or need help, but please reach out to your local police department and national charity. Last but not least, if you did enjoy this episode, please make a thumbs up, like it, star it, however your platform that you're listening to, and tell your friends, your peers of what you've heard, as well as share the podcast series as well. And for any listeners who are on podcast platforms, please leave a comment on how much you like our podcast. I'm Caroline Humer.
I'm Karen Shalev.
Thank you so much for listening, and join us in 2 weeks when we will discuss a little bit about the connection between going missing from hospitals. Appreciate it again for your joining us, and